want to record to the cloud. So, as we approach this week with the U.S. House of Representatives sending over an article of impeachment to the United States Senate, we formally begin the trial of former President Donald Trump. We've got our NorthStarNews.com legal analyst, Rob Tarver, with us today. So, Rob, give us an indication what we should be looking for from a legal perspective.
Well, it's funny that you say from a legal perspective, because realistically, although we talk about a Senate trial and moving into a trial situation, this is not really a legal trial. It's more of a political trial. And the reason I say that is there's going to be no criminal sanction that comes out of here and no civil sanction that comes out. The real sanction is going to be a political one. At best, or I should say at worst, it's the goal of the Democrats to try to prohibit Donald Trump from being able to ever hold any federal office ever again. Now, a lot of Americans would certainly support that given what has gone on. But to that end, this is really going to be a political standoff, whether or not the Democrats can gather enough votes, 2/3 of the Senate, to be able to say that Donald Trump, that they have met the standard for impeachment and the standard basically for a bar from office.
So you mentioned a very interesting point, the political context of this Senate trial. How do you see this playing out beyond the Senate trial? You know, you have a former president who's facing some legal liability in multiple states. How does this frame those lawsuits in the context of a former United States president who has been accused of leading an insurrection? Does this at all give prosecutors across the country at least a political muscle they need to go after a former president?
Well, I think it does. I got to tell you, I think it cuts both ways. Number one, yeah, it gives you the political muscle to say, hey, this is a bad guy. He's done bad things. All of America now has seen just how bad he is, and we've all seen the consequences. And again, once this Senate trial gets underway, and if they produce it right and put all that evidence in front of the American people, and you and I have talked before about all the evidence that's going to come in, but if they get that in front of them, then on the state level, I think many prosecutors will be able to say, you know what, we have these crimes, we have these actual criminal acts that have been committed, and we're going to take the time to go ahead and move forward with the prosecutions. Now, I wrote an article for North Star a couple of weeks ago about Georgia, because I think Georgia is an incredibly fertile ground, given all that Donald Trump did to interfere with the election, for some sort of real criminal legal action. But I said it cuts both ways, because I think the other thing is, some people may be willing to say after he takes or gets, or after the Democrats get their pound of flesh, so to speak, that, enough is enough. This is piling on, and maybe we shouldn't do X, Y, and Z. I tend to believe they'll do the other.
Doesn't Trump have some risk here in this trial, in that those individuals who were injured in the insurrection, families of police officers who were killed because of the insurrection, could he face some civil liability coming out of this?
The day after it happened, and it's funny because everyone in their own profession has the things that they salivate over. So I'm getting calls from friends of mine who do a lot of civil work, and I do some civil work as well, basically saying, man, if we could just be or represent some of the families, because the fact of the matter is here, the civil standard is much less than the criminal standard. Criminal standard is you got to prove that something happened beyond a reasonable doubt. Civil standard is a simple preponderance. In other words, it is more likely than not that Donald Trump's actions caused the injury here in the chain of events. And I don't know that it will be too difficult to really prove that. But I'll tell you one thing, the Senate trial is likely to be the footprint or the blueprint, so to speak, for how that's going to happen in a civil context. These are the types of things that could bankrupt Donald Trump personally, and not just Donald Trump. Remember, there are a few people on that stage that were really inciting, one of which was Rudy Giuliani, who talked about combat. Now, you don't use combat in any other situation except for the fact that you intend for there to be some sort of struggle. So he's going to have a difficult time getting out of that.
Well, I also think it's interesting that a lot of these folks who have been arrested after the insurrection are pointing their fingers at Donald Trump,
Mhm.
saying we were there because he told us to come there, right? And we were following his instruction. So I think who the Democrats put on the stand as witnesses, what videos that they used during the trial, may have much larger implications for Donald Trump post the Senate trial. And that you're absolutely right. I think that he stands to be exposed uh, liability wise because I think many of these people will see him as the culprit. And so, and it's what's really fascinating to me is that we have not yet heard from police unions in terms of protecting officers. Now, in most cases like this, the unions would have stepped out first, right? They would have taken a hardline stand. So I think it would be interesting if someone challenged the unions to say, well, where are you? Like in any other instance, when we've had instances of police brutality and African Americans have claimed that they've been brutalized, the unions have stepped up immediately and defended the officer.
Right.
They're providing no defense to these officers or their families. They're not saying a word.
Yeah. Well,
So
I'd like to get your take on that because I have my own take on why they're not doing it. But you as a guy who studied politics for all of your life, what is your take on why the unions are not stepping up? Why we don't hear from them?
I think they're caught with their pants down. I really do. I think these are labor unions that came out strongly in favor of Donald Trump.
Mhm.
And strongly in favor means that you were encouraging your membership to write checks to support the Trump campaign. So, what do you do now as a union leader when you have fellow officers who have been injured and killed after you've been out there supporting the very person who instigated this incident? So, I think there are probably some unions where there are a lot of internal discussions right now because if I'm a police officer, I have to ask the question. So, do we have a union that represents the interests of police officers, or are we just a political organization that's going to be representing candidates who we align with their politics? And
Yeah,
this is a critical
yeah.
moment for unions, right? Because when you look at, there's probably never been any clearer video of a police officer being assaulted as there was of that officer on the Capitol. And we have the officer describing that attack, talking about how he was pleading with people, that he had a family, and they still were beating him. You've got this guy who was arrested for using a hockey stick to beat the officer. So we have a clear-cut example of an officer just being assaulted. Now we
And not only
know,
that, remember that officer testified that they said they wanted to get his gun and shoot him. And
yes.
all he could do was just hold on to his gun. So this wasn't just beating an officer.
Oh
They
no,
were going to shoot this
they
guy.
were going to shoot him, and the other officer, they were going to crush him in the door. They didn't care. They literally tried to crush the life out of him. And so, look,
And
we
so I'm
know.
sure you expected Patrick Lynch
Oh,
weigh
absolutely.
in any minute and to say, hey,
Look,
this is crazy.
Patrick Lynch shows his behind every time there is an incident of police brutality in New York City. You can expect Patrick Lynch to come out of the woodwork. Patrick Lynch has been silent. He's been invisible, hasn't said a word because I think the unions realize they've got a problem on their hands now because it's sort of like the cat is out the bag about what they're really concerned with. And what they're really concerned with is the maintenance of white supremacy. We've always known we've had this problem in police unions, but this incident puts it out there publicly because there's no reason, not after how we saw the reaction after the protest over the George Floyd murder.
Mm-hmm.
Like they were out there talking about, these thugs, these criminals in the street, Blue Lives Matters. Now all of a sudden it's crickets and you don't hear them, right? And I find all of this, of course, sad, but I find it amusing because for so long white supremacy has hid behind this veneer of being a patriotic movement. They've wrapped themselves in the flag. They've used all the symbolism of America to suggest that they are the real patriots. You even have Donald Trump now talking about establishing a patriots party, which I hope he really does. Because I think we really need to identify the white nationalists in this country.
Yeah.
And they've been hiding so long behind the Republican banner or the conservative banner. I just want them to come out and say, we're white nationalists. Like, this is what we believe in. And that insurrection
or we're white supremacists. But
yes,
my take, talking about my take on this whole thing with the police, I think that policing in America has become so symbiotic with white supremacy that it is difficult for them in these times to even separate themselves and to take a side. Because the fact of the matter is we all know that policing manifests itself in different ways in different communities, and we know how it manifests itself in our community. So when you're talking about policing of white people who stand up in mass for white supremacy, that's an incredibly difficult thing for them to wrap their head around. And so they have a choice. Do we take a position or do we just remain silent? And they took the coward's way out, which is just to remain silent so that they can live to be hypocrites another day.
Right. Well, here's the irony of it all. We would have never expected a white police officer to be beaten in the way that he was on the steps of the Capitol. We could all foresee a situation where a Black or Latino officer would come under attack. But I think that by attacking white police officers, they really showed their hand, because it was basically like, you're in the way of our taking over this country for the sake of whiteness. And we don't care if you look like us. We're willing to kill you because you are standing in the way. And I think it was a powerful moment. If there was a Hall of Fame of white supremacist moments in America, that moment would be way up on them. In fact, I really think we may need to create a white supremacist Hall of Fame, because there have been so many of these incidents over the decades that you looked at and you said, oh man, it can't get any worse than this.
Yeah.
Right? Like after the 60s and civil rights movement, the fire hoses and the German shepherds, you were like, oh man, it can't get worse than this. Then you saw Rodney King. And it's like, oh, it can't get worse than this. Now you see the Capitol. It's like,
we saw Charlottesville earlier in the presidency. We said, can't get any worse than this. The guys white marching with torches. What's next? Torches. Well, we got a chance to see what was next. And the incredible thing here, there is an incredible lesson. I mean, this is horrible stuff to watch, but it is horribly illustrative of where we are in America right now. Because this, more than anything else, this whole series of events, starting with Donald Trump's post-election behavior all the way into the insurrection and beyond, has demonstrated for everyone to see the hypocrisy of white America in every area. The hypocrisy in politics, the hypocrisy in policing, the hypocrisy of businesses who refuse to take a stand against that, the hypocrisy of the institutions, just so much hypocrisy. Now, let's look at one other area of hypocrisy. How many of these insurrectionists have been permitted to go home to their mothers and fathers and wives and uncles and brothers to be welcomed with open arms? Well, we just stormed the Capitol. We took it over, but I'm still here.
Oh, absolutely.
We keep talking about what would happen if Black people were involved. The fact of the matter is, we know what would happen. There's no way that most of those people should be able to walk back into their homes. And the way that you treat them pre-trial is a measure of what you believe is the severity of their crimes. And from what I'm seeing so far, I don't believe America is treating this thing as serious as it really is.
Oh, look, you're absolutely right. I mean, we're looking at what I call the $2 bail system, because folks are going in and dropping 20 cents on the table and walking out the door. And for me, the most egregious one of them all is this white woman who was going to Pelosi's laptop, right? Like how in the heck is she walking the streets right now? If it were a Black person, first of all, there would have been no bail set. it would have been like, this is an act of treason. You're going to stay in here until trial. This white woman gets up and she's able to walk.
And not only is she able to walk, $15,000 bail.
Yes.
Sorry, not bail, $15,000 bond.
Right.
As you know, if you're posting bonds cost little or nothing, and you can put up your house or some other property as collateral. So once again, we're seeing such an incredible double standard. There are people sitting right, in our county jails and even our federal system, because I've represented people in the federal system on criminal acts that have done far less. They certainly haven't threatened democracy. They may have threatened a family member or something in their community, but they haven't threatened American democracy. Yet she can walk out on those charges.
All you got to do is go to Rikers in New York, right? When you think of the thousands of brothers and sisters who are holed up in Rikers because of excessive bail. And so part of what we have to recognize is that this is a moment of truth in America. Like, many of us have watched these systems and watched systemic racism unfold over decades, but much of it's unfolded in a way that doesn't really grab the attention of the American public. And I think this summer and fall was an awakening for America, because for the first time in a long time, the Rodney King incident was certainly bad, but it was sort of like an isolated incident. What Donald Trump did, he brought us a TV program every night for 4 years in a row called American Racism, right? And we watched that show and our mouths dropped open, because we were like, really? Like, you're going to build a wall between us and Mexico, and that's not even a problem when it comes to illegal immigration? Like, he did so many, what we would have considered beforehand to be so egregious as a president, that he normalized it. Yeah. And he normalized it to the point that he offered white racists comfort. And so they saw in Trump the signal that they needed, whether it was Charlottesville or whether it was the United States Capitol. They felt free for the first time in a long time to be racist and to be violent. Yeah. And I think that the challenge we have before us is, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. You got to kill the genie. Like, somewhere along the line, we have to understand that we have to put up a fight and stamp out racism, because it's never going back in the bottle. Trump set it free. It's a Pandora's box. Those folks who are at the Capitol, they feel liberated. Right? When you listen to them talk, they feel proud of the fact that they busted into the United States Capitol. It's like
and one of the reasons why they feel liberated, I don't mean to cut you off, but one of the reasons they feel liberated is that this was a sequence of events leading up to the Capitol. They in Washington, in Michigan, in Idaho, they walked into the State House with weapons. And the police said, well, we thought it was better to let's let them come in rather than to risk someone getting hurt. Someone getting hurt? Again, that's the value of white life. They felt that it was so valuable and so important that none of those white people get hurt, that they were willing to let them do what they needed to do. The fact of the matter is, we're sitting in a position now where we have to effectively challenge these things and treat them as seriously as we can. And that begins, just getting back to our original point, with holding everyone accountable, including Donald Trump. But you can't just hold Donald Trump accountable without holding those individuals who traverse the State House responsible. Just this week, there was an article coming out that suggested that the Justice Department was trying to decide whether or not to prosecute all of the individuals who have been involved in this matter. And that would just be another sequential step in emboldening these people, making them bold, making them understand that there are no real consequences. You have to hit people as hard as you can, when you can, and let them know that this type of thing is not going to be tolerated. Otherwise, all it is just an invitation to do more.
Well, the scene reminded me of the scenes, the historical photos that we see of lynchings, that it becomes a celebratory almost picnic-like atmosphere. And
Mhm.
that's why you could have the white woman who got maced talking about, well, we were storming the Capitol. This is a revolution. This is a
Revolution.
revolution, right?
Capitals.
And she has this lightheartedness about it, like, oh yeah, like I traveled all the way from my home state because I heard we were gonna have a good time. And don't forget what Trump said in that tweet about January 6th prior to that. He says it's going to be wild.
Right, right.
Right? He precipitated the atmosphere we saw on the lawn of the Capitol because those folks, beyond the ones who were chanting and cheering, and there was thousands of people who were there just to kind of check the scene out. Like it was like, oh, they're storming the Capitol. Like, isn't that cool? Same thing when they used to burn us by the stake and hang us. Like folks may not have pulled the rope, but they came there to see the action, right? Because it was this moment that defined whiteness. And that's, to me, will forever stick out in my mind about January 6th. It was a white party.
Yeah.
That's all it was.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think these issues, as we move forward, and we'll certainly continue to have these discussions on NorthstarNews.com, I think it's important that we always keep in front of our community and in front of America the truth, and that we can't back off of that truth. We can't allow this incident to be minimized. We can't allow Donald Trump's responsibility to be minimized. We can't allow his co-conspirators like Rudy Giuliani to get off the hook when they were part and parcel to this insurrection on January 6th. And so I just encourage our readers of NorthstarNews.com to continue to um, click on to our articles, that we are going to try to keep you informed as we go forward. We're lucky to have Rob Tarver to provide the legal expertise on these issues, because even though they may seem simplistic, they are very complex, because we're talking about the very foundation of our country. And these are the reasons why, to really get a grasp of what we're really confronting, you got to go back to the Federalist Papers. You got to read and understand what the founders of this nation, as flawed as they were brilliant in trying to predict the possibility of someone like a Donald Trump being elected, because they understood that. They came out of a monarchy, they came out of England, and they didn't want to have a nation that was ruled in the way that they were subjected to rule in England. So we will continue this conversation, my good brother, and we will try to keep our community informed. But as always, appreciate your input and your insight. And I encourage folks, whenever Rob Tarver's got an article up on NorthstarNews.com, read it and get enlightened. But we'll be back at you soon.
Always good to do this.
All right, brother.